Okay, I've been told that my only job is basically to keep things on time, so we'll kick off. Our first presenter today is Sacha Jellinek, and he's talking about a coordinated approach to planning landscape-scale ecological restoration. Thanks, Sacha.
Thanks very much. So, yeah, as Randall just said, I'm here to talk to you today about a prioritisation approach which we've undertaken in the Coorong, Lower Lakes and Murray Mouth to try and prioritise revegetation and restoration activities in that region. So just to give you a quick rundown of my talk, I'll give an overview about the Coorong, Lower Lakes and Murray Mouth Recovery Project, and in particular the vegetation program. I'll talk about the prioritisation activities that we've undertaken, so specifically a landscape assessment, a site planner's guide to help us actually direct on the ground where restoration would occur, and a marksand analysis to, again, really pinpoint what patches we wanted to focus on. Then I'll talk about what those prioritisation activities actually allowed us to achieve, and looking forward how these can be used in the future by other agencies or other groups. So the Coorong, Lower Lakes and Murray Mouth Recovery Project is a 5-year state and federally funded project which started back in 2011 and 12. It's a large-scale project, so working around the Lakes Alexandrina, Lake Albert and the Coorong, so around 140,000 hectares of land, and it came about due to the Millennium Drought. So, as you're probably all aware, this is when hardly any water was coming down the Murray River. The lakes started to dry up. There was big environmental problems such as acid sulfate soils, ecological crashes, and also big social and cultural problems as well due to that drought. So the recovery project came about, and that was looking at trying to buffer around Lakes Alexandrina, Lake Albert and the Coorong. So it created a 5-kilometre buffer around this area to try and protect this Ramsar wetland. So the vegetation program in particular looked at trying to undertake habitat and terrestrial revegetation and restoration. And this talk today is just mainly going to focus on how we prioritise the terrestrial revegetation that we undertook. As I said, it's an ecologically significant area. It's a Ramsar wetland and habitat for a lot of threatened flora and fauna. So why did we want to undertake a prioritisation of our revegetation activities? Well, we wanted a framework about how best to direct our restoration, and it provided us with a monitoring tool so we could help identify the future ecological outcomes of our restoration activities. It allowed us to strategically allocate resources in a cost-effective manner. So we knew that our expenditure of funds was creating the best possible biological and ecological outcomes to maximise the resilience of this Ramsar wetland. And it also made us, or allowed us to be accountable to the work that we're undertaking. So what were the steps to this prioritisation that we undertook? Well, firstly there was a landscape assessment. And this was to help us to identify and describe the different vegetation communities in the area, or different vegetation types, and their conservation priorities. The marksand analysis helped us to actually pinpoint on the ground which patches were best to restore. And a site planner's guide helped us on the ground when we were out in the field to actually help us identify what the vegetation type was most likely to be in, say, a bare paddock, for example. So I'll run through each of these in more detail. So a landscape assessment really is about firstly working out what the vegetation types in the landscape were. So this used data from the biological database of South Australia as far as flora records. It also used mapping from soil type and location, as well as expert opinion, to come up with a number of different vegetation types that were likely to occur in the Coorong Lower Lakes and Murray Mouth landscape. We then wanted to know what were the priority vegetation types that we really want to focus our work on. So we used a fauna species, in this case birds, to help us identify what the trends were of birds in these landscapes. So again, we used data from the biological database of South Australia and expert knowledge, and fed this into a modelling package, a Bayesian belief network, to come out with the bird trends, how these birds were trending throughout the landscape. And overall, we joined these two data sets together. So we knew what the vegetation types were in the landscape, we knew the different bird types and how they responded to the different ecological landscapes or different vegetation types, so we were able to come up with priority vegetation types where we could focus our work, and also the best management actions we could undertake to restore or revegetate these areas. So the priority vegetation types that we came up with were pink gum woodland, so mainly around the Mount Lofty Ranges area. Mixed mallee ecosystems, so things like Eucalyptus porosa and Eucalyptus leucoxen woodland. Samphire habitat, which was obviously found in the lower areas around the lakes. And non-eucalypt grassy woodland, which was usually dominated by either Alocasia versicolata, so she oak, or native pine, Calitris gracilis. And then we used this information and we fed it into a package called MarkSan. And MarkSan's a prioritization tool. I'm really having a problem with that word today. It's a prioritization tool which is used in conservation reserve design. And it was used to help designate areas in the area like the Great Barrier Reef. And we wanted to use it to help us identify parcels of land in the landscape to restore. And we use things like degree of remanency and as well as connectivity and the presence of the bird species that we identified in the landscape assessment to try and work out the best areas to restore in that landscape. So I've got a map up there of samphire and where the best areas to restore samphire were as far as the MarkSan analysis was concerned. So you can see areas around High Marsh Island, just above Meningie, around close to Wellington and down the Coorong were the most important areas to restore for samphire habitat. So those were the areas we focused our restoration activities on. And to help us actually work out on the ground what communities were most likely to occur in these different landscapes, we used what we're calling a Site Planner's Guide, or a guide to restoring the terrestrial vegetation of the Coorong Lower Lakes and Murray Mouth region to help us plan on-ground restoration. And it provides a site-specific key, so once you're out in the landscape, you can actually go through and try and identify the terrestrial vegetation type which is most likely to occur in that area. It also provides a guide to what species you can plant to try and restore that community, and it also provides possible densities to use when you're revegetating these areas. And you've just got to note that this is developed for, or was developed for our program, so it's more focused around undertaking tube stock revegetation, but it could be adapted to be used when you're undertaking something like direct seeding. And it provides a broad scale information about the landscape, but it also requires quite a bit of local knowledge. So basically where to plant plants, the best landscapes for them, where they're most likely to survive in the, say, paddock that you're replanting. So we've developed this guide, and hopefully in the next month or so we'll be able to share it with everyone so it can be used in the future. So in summary, these tools really assisted us to prioritise the best areas to restore in this large landscape. It was scientifically rigorous, so it is really underpinned by data and expert knowledge. It maximises the ecological benefits in the landscape for this really important Ramsar wetland, and it allows us to cost effectively allocate resources so we get the best bang for our ecological buck. And we think that this framework of undertaking landscape assessment and a markdown analysis can really be used in other areas to pinpoint the best areas to restore and most important priority vegetation types to focus on. So looking forward, what tools do we have and how can they be used? So as I've said, we've done this landscape assessment, we've shown how it can be done, and it's been done in other areas of the state as well. And we've got GIS layers to show where these vegetation types are most likely to occur in the landscape. We've got a markdown report, and again GIS layers to show exactly on the ground what areas we think are the priorities to restore. And we're about to put out this site planner's guide to help people in this landscape restore vegetation more effectively. And as Haif will talk about next, it's very much about sharing this data, trying to get this data out into the broader community so it can be used. So there's a real legacy to the work that we've undertaken in this landscape. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sacha. We've got time for a couple of questions, if anyone's got one.
I'd just like to ask you how long the different phases of that project took you. So how long did it take you to do the landscape assessment, the mark sand modelling and so on?
Probably the landscape assessment around 6 months or so. The mark sand didn't take too long because it was using a lot of that information from the landscape assessment, so maybe a month or so. The site planner's guide has taken a fair bit longer to compile because there's a lot of information, a lot of expert opinion to go into it. So maybe that's taken 6 months to a year to develop as well. So it does take some time to develop these tools, but hopefully in the future they can be really useful for the community and the department as well.
Any other questions?
I just wondered about the reference to BirdLife as your guide to strengthen the direction of your vegetation connection. And I wonder about going down one in the species list to maybe insect life that's there. That would be a broader support for a greater diversity. Your call.
I personally think that would be great because I love invertebrates, but it does boil down to what data is available, and especially in this landscape, and I think probably most landscapes, the best fauna you're going to get, the best records you're going to get are going to be for birds. So you need quite a lot of data to feed into this.
Accepting that there are entomologists out there. There are some entomologists out there now that can provide some sort of guide to what we might look for in different locations, etc. We can do it if it's a long haul.
Yeah, and as I said, I think it would be great to do and a really important thing to do. I guess for this project, the knowledge